The Pacific Ocean is larger than all land on Earth combined. Centuries before European ships arrived, people were already crossing it. They sailed vast distances between tiny islands without any of the tools we consider essential. They used no compass, no maps, and certainly no GPS. Their journey is one of humanity's deepest historical mysteries. By the end, you will understand how an ancient science of stars, waves, and wildlife allowed these mariners to master the sea, and why this knowledge is a vital compass for our own future. How did they navigate thousands of miles of empty blue to find specks of land we would struggle to locate even today? What does their intimate bond with the ocean reveal about our own disconnected world? The answer reshapes everything we know about exploration, intelligence, and our place in the natural world. What do you think it truly means to be lost? Its sheer size defies comprehension. To sail from the coast of Asia to the shores of South America is a journey of over 10,000 miles, a distance greater than the entire width of the Atlantic Ocean. Within this blue expanse, the islands are not stepping stones. They are isolated specks, lonely mountain peaks whose summits just break the surface of an abyss miles deep. Finding one is the ultimate needle in a haystack scenario, where the haystack is an ever-shifting, trackless plane of water and sky. For European explorers arriving centuries later with compasses, astrolabes, and eventually precise clocks, the Pacific remained a brutal and often fatal puzzle. Ships with the best technology of their age would sometimes sail in vast, hopeless circles, their crews succumbing to hardship before ever sighting land. This repeated failure makes the consistent, repeatable success of the ancient Pacific Islanders not just impressive, but intellectually jarring. How could those without our tools succeed so brilliantly where we, with our tools, so often failed? The answer begins with a fundamental shift in perspective. Western navigation traditionally relies on separating the traveler from the world. You carry your tools with you, a compass to tell direction, a clock to tell longitude, a map to represent the territory. It is a system of external instruments. The Pacific Way was the opposite. It was not about carrying a representation of the world. It was about learning to listen to the world itself. Their vessel was not just a ship, it was a sensory instrument, and the ocean was not a void to be crossed, but a textured, speaking landscape to be read. Consider the routes of the great settlement voyages. From the islands of West Polynesia, navigators guided their double-hulled canoes north across more than 2,000 miles of open ocean to find the Hawaiian archipelago, a chain of volcanic dots in an immense blue desert. Others sailed southeast for a similar staggering distance to reach Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, one of the most remote inhabited places on the planet. And perhaps most awe-inspiring was the southwest voyage to Aotearoa, New Zealand, a journey that required crossing treacherous, cold latitudes and finding two long islands that, from the approach, are easily missed. These were not accidents. The genetic and linguistic evidence is clear. These were intentional voyages of colonization, undertaken with women, children, plants, and animals on board. They were moving their entire world. This was not getting lost and hoping for the best. This was knowing with a quiet certainty that a new home lay beyond a horizon that stretched for weeks. That certainty came from a science so deeply woven into culture and environment that it becomes invisible to an outside eye looking only for a compass or a chart. To see it, we must learn to read a different kind of map. The night sky over the open Pacific is a dome of absolute clarity, untouched by the glow of cities. For a trained navigator, this is not a beautiful mystery. It is a precise and speaking instrument. The first foundational technique is a form of celestial literacy so complete it redefines the word navigation. They steered by what scholars now call the star compass. This was not a physical object, but a mental construct, a map etched into memory. Imagine the horizon as a vast circle surrounding your canoe, and picture specific, bright stars as they rise from that circle or sink into it. Each star has its own unique door, its own point on the horizon where it appears and disappears every single night. The rising point of the star Arcturus, for example, might be the unwavering marker for northeast. Its setting point directly opposite marks southwest. In this system, the Navigator knows 32 or more of these cardinal points, each one defined not by an abstract direction like north, but by the very body of a star. The entire sky becomes a giant compass dial, slowly rotating through the night. This knowledge was not written down. It was woven into the fabric of a navigator's mind through years of apprenticeship, encoded in chants and stories that tied star paths to lineages and histories. To hold a course, you would simply keep the prow of your canoe aligned with the bearing of your target star as it climbed the sky. But stars move. As the night progresses, your guiding star will eventually set. This is where the true genius of the system reveals itself. You do not get lost in the dark. You have already memorized the sequence, the celestial relay race. As one star begins to descend, you know which star will next rise on the same bearing to take its place. You follow a star path, a chain of celestial guides that pass the baton across the heavens, allowing you to maintain a constant heading for hours. This transformed the night from a period of uncertainty into the most reliable segment of the voyage. The sky was not static, it was dynamic and predictable, a clock and a compass fused into one. Yet the sun would always rise, drowning out those precious stars. The voyage continued under the blinding, featureless blue of day. This is where the navigator's science had to become even more subtle, learning to read the messages written on the surface of the sea itself. But the sky does not always cooperate. Clouds can blanket the stars for nights on end, and the sun offers only a general east-west reference. In these moments of celestial silence, the master navigator does not panic. They simply shift their attention from the heavens above to the living ocean below, feeling the voyage through the very bones of the vessel. This is the second foundational technique, a form of perception so refined it seems almost supernatural: wave piloting. With no visible horizon, seated in the hull or lying down to feel the motion more purely, the navigator becomes one with the canoe's dance. They are reading the ocean's deep, rhythmic pulse through the soles of their feet and the seat of their pants. The open Pacific is never a random chaos of water. It is organized by massive, rolling swells generated by distant weather systems and steady trade winds. These swells can travel for thousands of miles, maintaining a consistent direction for days or weeks. A navigator learns to identify this dominant swell, to internalize its angle against the hull, its period between peaks. It becomes an unwavering highway, a submerged compass pointing a true course even when the sky is dark. Staying aligned with this deep water rhythm is the first layer of wave piloting. The true mastery, however, lies in detecting the invisible. An island is not just land above the water, it is a massive obstacle far beneath the surface. As the deep ocean swells encounter the submerged slopes of a volcanic island or an atoll still dozens of miles beyond the horizon, something remarkable happens. The water deflects, reflects, and bends around this unseen mass. This interaction creates a subtle interference pattern in the swell, a quiet signature of land. To the trained navigator, the regular ocean rhythm develops a faint echo, a cross swell, a specific pattern of bob and weave that whispers of something solid ahead. It is a wave shadow, not of darkness but of altered energy. This skill is a grand, natural form of echolocation. The ocean sends out its constant pulse in the form of swells, and the island sends back a distorted reply, a message carried through the water itself. By reading these minute reflections and refractions, A navigator could not only hold a course but correct it, steering toward a land they could not yet see, guided solely by the stories told in the sea's motion. The ocean was transformed from a blank expanse into a textured, living map, every swell and ripple a character in a narrative of distance and direction. And just as the sea whispered of hidden land, the sky above it began to fill with messengers, biological signals that completed the navigator's sensory picture. The horizon remained a silent line, but the world above and below it was speaking. The third foundational technique transformed the entire seascape into a living, breathing signpost system, where birds became compasses and clouds drew maps in the sky. This was not magic, but a profound ecological intimacy, a deep knowledge of the habits and homes of other species. Take certain seabirds like the graceful Manu Oku, the white tern. These birds are dedicated fishermen, but they must return to land each night to roost. Their behavior tells a precise story. If you spot one of these terns flying purposefully in the late afternoon, it is almost certainly heading directly toward its island home. Its flight path becomes an arrow pointing to land, and the time of day tells you roughly how far that land might be, based on the bird's known foraging range. Similarly, the distinctive toria or oyster catcher with its sharp, piping call was another trusted messenger, its presence indicating nearby shores. But the signs were not only winged. The navigator's gaze would lift from the water to study the very architecture of the sky. A lone, puffy cloud on an otherwise clear day could be meaningless, or it could be the most important clue of the voyage. A stationary cloud with a darker, greenish tinge on its belly was not just a cloud, it was a mirror. This phenomenon, sometimes called cloud branding, is the reflection of a shallow, sunlit lagoon onto the base of the cloud above it. That patch of green in the sky was the ghost image of an island still far beyond the visible horizon, a celestial flag planted by the land itself. Navigators also learned to read the subtle gradients in ocean color, the shift from the deep indigo of the open ocean to the lighter, greener hue that signaled shallower waters over a submerged reef or the approach to an atoll. Even the debris of the sea spoke volumes. A certain type of driftwood or vegetation floating past could indicate the proximity of a particular island group, as if the land was sending out its calling cards on the currents. This entire matrix of biological and environmental cues represents a dialogue with nature, not a monologue of human command. Every creature, from the diving tern to the pod of dolphins that might play alongside the canoe, was a participant in the journey. Success depended not on conquering the wild ocean, but on understanding its rhythms and respecting its inhabitants. This principle of listening, of integration, was physically embodied in the very vessels that carried these master observers. The canoe was not just a means of travel, it was an extension of the navigator's senses, a crafted instrument designed for this specific conversation with the sea. The navigator's profound awareness of sea and sky required a physical form, a partner crafted to translate that knowledge into motion across thousands of miles. That partner was the Voyaging Canoe, a technological masterpiece whose design reveals a philosophy as deep as the ocean it sailed. This was not a simple dugout or a raft lashed together for a short coastal hop. It was a purpose-built, open ocean vessel, engineered over generations to be a resilient, responsive extension of the navigator's own senses. The most iconic design seen across Polynesia was the double-hulled canoe. Picture two long, slender hulls, each expertly carved from massive tree trunks, sailing side by side. They were connected by a strong, arched platform, creating a stable deck for crew, passengers, and the precious cargo of plants, animals, and supplies needed to start a new life. This twin-hull configuration was a stroke of genius. It provided immense stability in rough seas, preventing the catastrophic capsizing that could doom a single-hulled ship. More than that, the space between the hulls acted as a natural shock absorber, allowing the entire vessel to flex and ride with the swells rather than fight against them. This was a craft built to harmonize with the ocean's rhythm, not to brute force its way through. The sail was another revelation. Instead of a simple square of cloth, these canoes used lateen sails, triangular sails made from countless panels of tightly woven pandanus leaves. This shape and material allowed for incredible control. By adjusting the angle of the sail and using a steering paddle, a skilled crew could actually sail against the direction of the wind, tacking back and forth to reach destinations that lay upwind. This ability to sail into the wind shattered the old assumption that ancient voyages were merely one-way trips dictated by prevailing currents. It granted navigators true agency over their route. Every component spoke of foresight. Hulls were carefully sealed and sometimes included compartments filled with lightweight, buoyant materials like dried sugarcane, acting as natural life preservers to keep the vessel afloat even if damaged. The construction process itself was a sacred act, blending technical skill with deep cultural meaning. Master builders would select specific trees with ritual care, often offering prayers and ceremonies to honor the forest and the spirit of the tree. The crafting of the canoe, from the shaping of the hulls to the lashing of the joints with durable coconut fiber cordage, was a community endeavor, a physical prayer for safe passage. In this way, the canoe was never just a collection of wood and fiber. It was a living entity, a trusted crew member born from both forest and human intention. It was the tangible expression of a society's collective will to explore, designed to harness the very winds and glide over the very swells that the navigator spent a lifetime learning to read. But a perfect vessel, no matter how brilliantly engineered, is inert without the human mind and spirit to guide it. The canoe was a masterpiece of engineering, but its true potential was unlocked only by the human mind at its helm. This individual, known in traditions like those of the Caroline Islands as a PWO, was not merely a sailor but a living supercomputer of the sea. Their prestige was immense, earned through a lifetime of cultivating a specific, powerful form of intelligence. This cognitive toolkit began with the creation of a dynamic mental chart, an internal navigation system more sophisticated than any paper map. Picture and etch a sketch of the mind, but one that never shakes to erase. On this internal screen, the navigator continuously plotted their position, their speed, and their direction, updating the information with every sensory input. They kept a constant dead reckoning, a mental calculation of how far they had traveled and in what direction, based on the feel of the waves, the passage of stars overhead, and the estimated speed of the canoe. This required a phenomenal, disciplined memory, one trained to hold vast libraries of data. To reinforce this, knowledge was encoded not in books but in charts and physical models. In the Marshall Islands, navigators used stick charts, intricate frameworks of palm ribs and cowrie shells. These were not maps of land but diagrams of ocean swells, showing how wave patterns bent and reflected around specific islands. Studying these charts was like learning the grammar of the sea's movement, translating a tactile, rhythmic language into a mental blueprint. Yet beyond pure memory and calculation lay something even more profound, a skill navigators themselves often describe as intuition. This was not a guess, but a synthesized, almost subconscious processing of all the environmental data. After days or weeks at sea, immersed in the rhythm of the voyage, a master navigator could enter a deeply focused state. In this state, the subtle cross swell from an unseen island, the specific behavior of birds at a certain time of day, and the particular quality of the light on the clouds would coalesce into a single, undeniable sensation. They could feel the land's presence, a pull on their awareness long before any silhouette broke the horizon. This embodied knowledge transformed abstract natural signs into a coherent, real-time narrative, a story of where they were and where they were going, written in wind, water, and wildlife. It challenges our modern reliance on a screen that gives us a blinking dot and a calculated route, divorcing us from the very world we travel through. This deep, cultivated awareness raises a vital question for any society that depends on such rare expertise. How do you ensure such precious, intangible knowledge does not vanish when the master is gone? The answer lies in a sacred chain of teaching, a system of preservation that treated navigation not as a mere skill, but as a cultural heartbeat. This profound awareness was not stored in books or databases, but in the living memory of a chosen few. In a world without writing, the survival of this complex science of the sea depended entirely on a sacred chain of transmission, an oral tradition fused with hands-on apprenticeship. Knowledge was not information to be downloaded, it was wisdom to be earned, a privilege granted only after years of dedicated service, watchful observation, and solemn initiation. A master navigator, or PWO, did not simply lecture his student. The education unfolded through every shared moment on land and sea. Elders would teach through rhythmic chants known as Oli, and through stories where heroes sailed the star path. These were not just tales, they were sophisticated mnemonics, embedding the rising points of crucial stars, the feel of specific ocean swells, and the sequential order of distant islands into a memorable, poetic code. The student learned by listening, by repeating, and by slowly internalizing this rhythmic library of the natural world. This ensured the knowledge was carried not as a dry list of facts, but as a living narrative, interwoven with cultural values and historical lineage. To make the invisible patterns of the ocean tangible, master teachers used remarkable physical models. In the Marshall Islands, they crafted what we now call stick charts, intricate frameworks made from the flexible ribs of palm fronds, with small cowrie shells tied at the intersections. To the untrained eye, these look like abstract sculptures, but to the student, they were dynamic diagrams of energy, not land. Each curved stick represented the refraction of a deep ocean swell as it wrapped around an unseen island. Each shell marked the location of an atoll, not by showing its shape, but by mapping the unique interference pattern it created in the surrounding sea. These charts were never taken on voyages. They were classroom tools used on quiet beaches to teach the grammar of wave piloting, to help a student visualize how an island they could not see would nonetheless announce its presence through a specific signature in the water. This entire system was designed as a filter of character. The long apprenticeship tested for more than a sharp memory. It assessed patience, humility, resilience, and spiritual reverence. The ocean was a teacher that could be fatal to the arrogant or the inattentive. By embedding the knowledge within a holistic education of mind, body, and spirit, communities ensured that only those with the requisite discipline and deep connection would become its custodians. This was how a worldview, not just a skill set, was preserved across generations. It maintained the viability of voyaging for centuries, creating a sustainable cycle where knowledge enabled survival, and survival mandated the careful passing of knowledge. This very framework, this reverence for integrated learning, now directly informs the powerful modern revival of these ancient arts, a revival born from a profound and urgent need to reclaim a compass for the future. This profound oral tradition, however, left no written logs or maps for modern historians to find. For a long time, the sheer scale of these voyages led many scholars to dismiss them as impossible, the result of lucky accidents or desperate drifts. How do we move from the compelling theory of wayfinding to concrete proof that these journeys were intentional, repeated, and skilled? The evidence arrives not from a single source, but from a powerful convergence of clues across multiple disciplines, painting an undeniable picture of purposeful exploration. Linguistics provides the first major thread. Despite the vast ocean separating them, the languages of islands from Hawaii to New Zealand to Rapa Nui share a clear common ancestry, much like Spanish and Italian descend from Latin. This linguistic family tree, known as Austronesian, could only have branched out through sustained two-way contact, not by random castaways who could never return home. The words for fundamental concepts like canoe, sail, and specific stars are strikingly similar across thousands of miles, a shared vocabulary born from a shared seafaring culture. Then archaeology uncovers a tangible trail. Beginning around 3,500 years ago, a distinct style of pottery decorated with intricate geometric patterns appears in the Western Pacific. This is Lapita pottery. As researchers carbon-dated settlements, they found this pottery moved eastward at a startling pace, reaching remote islands within just a few generations. This rapid directional spread is the signature of a moving people, carrying their cultural identity and technology with them in their canoes. Perhaps the most personal evidence comes from genetics. Studies of modern Pacific Islanders reveal a shared ancestry that traces back to source populations in Southeast Asia, but the genetic story does not stop with people. The Pacific rat, which cannot swim long distances, hitched rides with these voyagers, and its DNA tells the same migration story. Even plants bear witness. The sweet potato, a crop native to South America, was found across Polynesia long before European contact. Its presence is a silent, leafy testament to a voyage that reached the Americas and returned, a deliberate exchange across the world's greatest ocean. All this evidence pointed to a capability that some still doubted could be achieved without modern instruments. Then, in the 1970s, a bold experiment put the ancient methods to the ultimate test. The double-hulled canoe Hōkūleʻa was built using traditional designs and materials. Under the guidance of a master navigator from the Caroline Islands, Piailug, who held the star compass in his memory, Hōkūleʻa successfully sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using only the ancient techniques. This voyage of experimental archaeology did more than prove it was possible. It revitalized a cultural pride and reconnected a people with a heritage they were told was myth. The convergence is now complete, from the words they spoke and the pots they made, to the genes they carried and the seas they repeatedly crossed. This was not accident, it was artistry, a sustained epoch of human exploration that stands as one of our species' greatest achievements. And if they could navigate so precisely to known islands, it sparks a deeper, more controversial question. Did their voyages also take them to shores that history has forgotten? The tiny volcanic island of Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, is a perfect and terrible test of everything a navigator knew. Located over 1,200 miles from its nearest inhabited neighbor, it is a solitary speck in the southeastern Pacific, a mere dot of land surrounded by a moat of empty ocean so vast it feels more like space. Reaching it required a voyage not just of distance, but of profound counterintuition. The most likely settlement routes came from islands like Mangava or the Marquesas to the west and north, but to sail to Rapa Nui, you must travel almost directly against the prevailing trade winds and currents. This was not a journey where you could simply ride the weather. It demanded the advanced skill of sailing into the wind, tacking back and forth in a long, grueling zigzag that multiplied the already staggering distance. For weeks, the navigator would have no target, no chain of intervening islands to offer reassurance. The biological signposts would have faded away, leaving only the deep ocean swells and the silent stars. How did they know where to aim? One compelling theory points to the sky, not of stars but of birds. The sooty tern is a seabird known to migrate seasonally across the Pacific. Some researchers suggest that ancient navigators, with their intimate knowledge of animal behavior, may have recognized these terns as long-distance commuters. By observing their seasonal departure directions from known islands, a navigator might have deduced a flight path leading to a distant, unseen land, using the birds as living arrows pointing the way. Another clue may have been in the wind itself. While the trades blow steadily from the east, there are occasional seasonal reversals, brief windows where westerly winds can open a corridor. A master navigator holding generations of weather knowledge would have known to wait for this shift, launching the voyage during a precise seasonal window when the ocean itself would assist rather than resist. Finding Rapa Nui was the outer limit of the art, a leap of faith backed by supreme skill. But this very isolation, the factor that made finding it so miraculous, then became its defining condition. Once settled, maintaining the two-way voyaging contact with the distant homeland became exponentially harder. The same brutal winds that made arrival difficult made return voyages needed to bring new resources or people, a relentless uphill battle. Over generations, the knowledge of how to make that specific return journey, or the resources to build the canoes for it, may have faded. The society on Rapa Nui turned profoundly inward. In this context, the island's famous moai, those towering stone statues, take on a poignant new layer of meaning. They are not just monuments of power, but perhaps also monuments of memory, carved from the very rock of the new home in a world where connection to the old home was slipping away. The tremendous communal effort to create them may reflect a society redirecting its energy and identity in the face of increasing isolation. This does not diminish their achievement, it deepens its human story. The later ecological challenges the island faced, with changes to its landscape and resources, are a complex tale of a finite environment meeting a growing population. A break in the long-distance voyaging network meant that when local resources became strained, there was no easy resupply, no safety valve of migration or trade that had once sustained the broader Polynesian world. The settlement of Rapa Nui stands as both the zenith of ancient wayfinding and a sobering lesson in the fragility of even the most brilliant human networks. It shows that the peak of exploration could, under the most extreme conditions, lead to a cul-de-sac. Yet the very fact that people reached it at all, against all odds, forever shatters the myth of the passive, island-hopping primitive. These were deliberate explorers who stretched their technology and knowledge to the absolute limit, seeking new horizons simply because they were there. And if their voyages could span the entire Pacific, one must wonder, did their curiosity ever carry them even farther, to the continental shores that modern history claims they could never have known? A voyage was never just a crossing, it was a covenant. The master navigator stood at the helm not only as a technician of the sea, but as a priest of the horizon, his authority derived from a profound spiritual compact. Every element of the journey, from the selection of the tree for the canoe to the final approach to a new island, was governed by an intricate web of sacred principles. At the heart of this was the concept of mana, a spiritual power or efficacy that flowed through the universe. A successful navigator possessed immense personal mana, earned through lineage, rigorous training, and correct conduct. The canoe itself, once completed with the proper rituals, became a vessel of concentrated mana, a living entity with its own spirit, requiring respect and care. This was not superstition, it was a sophisticated system for managing risk and focus. It bound the crew together under a shared sacred purpose, aligning human intention with the immense, often unpredictable forces of nature. To violate this harmony was to risk everything. This is where the companion concept of tapu, often translated as sacred restriction, came into force. Certain actions were tapu to preserve the voyage's spiritual integrity and physical safety. There might be tapu on speaking of land prematurely, which could anger the ocean gods or create overconfidence. Specific foods or behaviors might be restricted to maintain ritual purity. These were not arbitrary rules. They were protocols designed to maintain a state of heightened awareness and collective discipline for weeks on end. The navigator performed rituals to communicate with deified ancestors who were believed to have sailed the same star paths and to honor deities of the ocean, wind, and storms. Before departure, offerings were made, During the voyage, chance called upon these ancestors for guidance, turning the sail into a prayer and the steering paddle into an instrument of communion. This spiritual framework provided the psychological ballast for the journey. When clouds blotted out the stars for nights on end, or when supplies ran low, it was this deep-seated belief in a protected, purposeful path that fortified the human spirit against despair. The voyage became a moving temple, a pilgrimage that reenacted the original, mythical journeys of the culture's founders. The canoe was a microcosm of their world, carrying not just people and plants, but their entire cosmology across the deep. This holistic fusion of science, skill, and spirit is what made the endeavor sustainable across generations. The modern mind often separates the practical from the sacred, seeing ritual as separate from results. But for these voyagers, the ritual was essential to the result. The correct spiritual alignment was as crucial as the correct star bearing, for it ensured the crew's minds and hearts were as prepared as their vessel. This deep cultural engine of motivation and meaning is what faded most dramatically when colonization and globalization introduced new tools and new guards. The compass and the chart provided a seductive shortcut, but they also disconnected the navigator from the living dialogue with the sea. The sacred covenant was broken, and with it, the integrated worldview that had powered the greatest exploration in human history. This loss makes the contemporary revival of wayfinding not just a recovery of technique, but a profound spiritual homecoming for Pacific communities. It is a reclaiming of identity, a reweaving of that sacred covenant with the ocean. And this revival, born from cultural necessity, is now offering something unexpected and vital to the entire world, a different kind of compass for navigating an uncertain future. The compass was a tool of astonishing precision, but it came at a hidden cost. When European ships first entered the Pacific, they brought more than new instruments. They introduced a world where the sacred dialogue between navigator and ocean was no longer the only path. The arrival of metal tools, firearms, and unfamiliar illnesses created profound social upheaval across the islands. Traditional voyaging networks, the lifeblood of cultural exchange and survival for millennia, began to fracture under this new pressure. Why build a voyaging canoe over years with ritual care when a trading schooner could bring goods faster? Why spend a decade memorizing the star compass when a brass instrument could give you a heading in seconds? The Western tools were seductive in their simplicity, offering shortcuts that seemed to render the old, demanding ways obsolete. But in accepting the shortcut, something essential was traded away. The compass gave a direction, but it did not tell you the story of the swell beneath your hull or the meaning behind a bird's flight at dusk. It was a piece of a system divorced from the integrated whole. This displacement of knowledge was accelerated by deliberate colonial policies and religious conversion. New authorities often saw the old practices as pagan or backward, actively discouraging the building of large canoes and the teaching of navigational chants. The role of the master navigator, once a position of the highest prestige and spiritual authority, lost its central place in a changing society. As the active practice of long-distance voyaging ceased, the living chain of apprenticeship was broken. The last of the great PWO, the true masters who held the full star compass in their minds, grew old and passed on without successors. By the dawn of the 20th century, it was widely believed that the ancient art of wayfinding had vanished forever, lost to the relentless tide of modernity. The knowledge was not gone, but it was sleeping, driven into the quiet corners of cultural memory. It survived in fragments, in half-remembered chants sung at gatherings, in old stories told to children, in the stubborn persistence of certain words for winds and stars. It was a library without librarians, a map that no one alive could fully read. This was not a natural evolution of technology. It was a rupture, a profound erosion of human heritage. A complete science of the natural world, developed over countless generations, was pushed to the very brink of extinction in just a few. The loss went far beyond a mere technique for sailing. It represented the silencing of a unique way of seeing, a language for conversing with the planet that had allowed humans to thrive in the planet's most expansive space. The ocean became a barrier again rather than a connective highway. Islands grew isolated in a new way, not by distance but by a forgotten kinship. This bleak period, however, set a crucial stage. For in the silence that followed the last great voyage, a deep cultural longing began to stir. A generation would arise that looked at the empty horizon and felt not an ending but a question. What if the stars still remembered the path, even if we had forgotten? This question would ignite one of the most inspiring stories of cultural reclamation in our time, a journey to wake the sleeping knowledge and prove that the ancient compass still pointed true. The silence was broken by the sound of adzes on wood. In the early 1970s, on a beach in Hawaii, something impossible began to take shape. It was a double-hulled voyaging canoe, built not from memory, but from the fragmented clues of history books, old drawings, and the deep cultural longing of a people who had been told their ancestors were merely castaways. They named her Hōkūleʻa, Star of Gladness, after the zenith star that passes directly over Hawaii. Her creation, spearheaded by artist and historian Herb Caen, was an act of defiance against a narrative of primitive accident. It was a hypothesis made of fiberglass and wood, a question posed to the ocean: could the ancient ways actually work? To answer it, they needed a navigator. The star compass had faded from living memory in Hawaii, a casualty of the rupture, but across the Pacific, on the tiny coral island of Satawal in Micronesia, the knowledge still breathed. There, a man named Piailug held the full star compass in his mind, a living library of a tradition that had never been broken. He was a PWO, a master navigator. When the call came from Hawaii, he answered. In the spring of 1976, Hōkūleʻa set sail from Hawaii for Tahiti, a journey of over 2,500 miles. On board was a crew of young Hawaiians, eager but untested, and one quiet, powerful man from a different ocean. Piailug sat at the stern, not with a compass or a sextant, but with his senses and his memory. For 31 days he guided the canoe. He read the swells that spoke of distant storms. He followed the star path from Hōkūleʻa to the setting Nu, the Southern Cross that pointed toward Tahiti. When clouds hid the sky, he felt the ocean's rhythm through the hull. He watched the birds. The crew witnessed a science in action that their own culture had lost. They saw landfall not as a lucky guess, but as the precise outcome of applied knowledge, when the island of Matava appeared exactly where Mao said it would. The arrival in Tahiti was electric. Over 17,000 people greeted the canoe, many in tears. It was a homecoming for a kinship that had been severed by time and forgotten history. Hōkūleʻa's voyage was a thunderclap of validation. It proved irrefutably that the ancestors were not drifters but deliberate, brilliant explorers. This was far more than a successful nautical experiment. It was a cultural lightning rod. Across Polynesia, a profound pride was reawakened. The voyage answered a deep, unspoken question about identity. If our ancestors could achieve this, what else about our history and our capabilities have we been taught to underestimate? Hōkūleʻa ignited a renaissance. New voyaging canoes were built in Tahiti, New Zealand, the Cook Islands, and beyond. A new generation clamored to learn, not from books, but from the few elders and from Mao himself, who began to teach. The star compass was replanted in Hawaiian soil. The canoe became a floating classroom and a powerful symbol of sovereignty, reasserting a Polynesian presence on the Pacific not defined by colonial maps. It also became a voice for the ocean itself, a platform for environmental stewardship, showing that the ancient principle of reading the natural world is the very wisdom needed to protect it. Hōkūleʻa did not just sail to Tahiti, it sailed into the future carrying a timeless question. How do we navigate a world we are deeply connected to, yet so often harm? Piailug stood on the deck of Hōkūleʻa as a living bridge between two eras. He was a PWO, a master navigator from the tiny coral island of Satawal, a place where the ancient star compass had never been broken. His knowledge was not an academic subject. It was his breath, his memory, his direct inheritance from a grandfather who had trained him with an intensity few could endure. As a boy, Mao was taken out in a canoe at night, his grandfather pointing to the star paths and demanding he memorize their names and bearings. He learned to feel the ocean's subtle signatures by lying in the bottom of a small boat, blindfolded, describing the swell patterns solely through the craft's motion. This was a total immersion, a forging of the mind and senses into a single, precise instrument for reading the world. By the time he was a young man, Mao had internalized a mental map of the Pacific so complete he could navigate hundreds of miles between invisible points with a quiet, unshakable confidence. He held a sacred trust, yet by the 1970s he watched as the younger generation on Satawal itself turned toward outboard motors and compasses, risking the very survival of the knowledge he embodied. He carried a profound loneliness, the weight of being perhaps the last of his kind. When the invitation came from Hawaii, it was a radical proposition. The request was for him to guide a canoe built by people who had lost the practice, to a land he had never seen, using methods his own students were abandoning. To share such sacred, clan-specific knowledge with outsiders was, by the strictest traditional codes, a potential violation. But Mao saw something deeper. He recognized in the Hawaiians a sincere hunger to reclaim their own story, a story his knowledge could verify. His decision to join Hōkūleʻa was not a betrayal of tradition, but a courageous expansion of it. He understood that for knowledge to live, it must be used, and for a lineage to survive, it must find new students. On that historic voyage to Tahiti, he was not just a technician, he was a teacher under the most extreme pressure. He patiently showed the crew how to read the ocean's long, rolling swells, how to distinguish the target swell from the clutter of wind waves. He pointed to the stars not as beautiful lights, but as fixed points on the horizon's great wheel. He demonstrated the constant mental dead reckoning, the ever-updating chart in his mind. For the Hawaiian crew, it was a revelation, a living proof that the legends were true. Mao's guidance transformed their voyage from a daring experiment into a cultural homecoming, an act of solidarity that reconnected severed family across the sea. His teaching philosophy was a powerful blend of unwavering tradition and pragmatic adaptation. He insisted on the foundational rigor, the non-negotiable memorization of the star compass and swell patterns. There were no shortcuts to this embodied knowledge, yet he was also a realist. He accepted the use of some modern materials in canoe construction if it meant more vessels could sail and more students could learn. He taught in parking lots at night, using streetlights to simulate stars, adapting the sacred patterns of the open ocean to the practical constraints of a modern world. His goal was not to create replicas of the past, but to reignite the cognitive engine of wayfinding in a new generation. He saw the core skill not as a historical curiosity, but as a vital form of intelligence, a way of thinking that cultivated patience, profound observation, and humility before the natural world. Under his tutelage, a new lineage was born. Navigators like Nainoa Thompson in Hawaii became his students, absorbing the knowledge and then adapting it to their own cultural context, creating a new Hawaiian star compass inspired by Mao's teaching. He effectively seeded a renaissance, proving that the human capacity for this deep environmental connection is not extinct. It is dormant, waiting to be reawakened with the right key. Piailug's legacy is a testament to the resilience of human wisdom. He passed away in 2010, but the star paths he taught are now traveled by dozens of navigators across the Pacific, from Hawaii to Aotearoa to Tahiti. His story demonstrates that while specific technologies can be forgotten, the underlying cognitive and perceptual skills can be recovered and reinvented. This insight now ripples far beyond the realm of voyaging canoes. Educators and psychologists look to wayfinding as a model for holistic learning, a system that integrates memory, sensory awareness, spatial reasoning, and storytelling into a single, powerful competency. It challenges our fragmented, screen-based education, suggesting that true understanding comes not from consuming information, but from cultivating a deep, attentive dialogue with the world around us. Mao bridged two worlds not by abandoning one for the other, but by showing that the oldest knowledge could answer the most modern hunger, a hunger for meaning, for connection, and for a compass that points not just north, but toward a more integrated way of being human. The principles of wayfinding are no longer confined to the decks of voyaging canoes. They are entering classrooms and shaping young minds. Across the Pacific, from Hawaii to New Zealand to the Cook Islands, educational programs are weaving the star compass into science curricula, transforming abstract concepts into lived sensory knowledge. Students might learn geometry by plotting star paths on a courtyard at night, or study physics by analyzing how a canoe's sail harnesses the wind. The Polynesian Voyaging Society's worldwide voyage, named Malama Hanua, meaning to care for our Earth, became a floating classroom that connected with communities globally, sharing not just a cultural story, but a powerful model of environmental stewardship. This is STEM seen through a cultural lens, where technology is the crafted canoe, engineering is the understanding of swell patterns, and mathematics is the constant mental calculation of a navigator's dead reckoning. To simulate the experience on land, educators use innovative tools. Star compass simulators, often simple circles marked on the ground with stones or lights representing key stars, allow students to walk through the rotating night sky, internalizing the celestial relay race. Ocean swell sensing exercises might involve lying in a darkened room feeling the tilt and roll of a moving platform, training the body to distinguish subtle rhythmic patterns. This education cultivates more than facts, it builds a specific kind of intelligence. It trains deep observational acuity, the patience to watch and listen, and systems thinking, the understanding that a bird's behavior, a cloud's color, and a wave's refraction are all interconnected signals within a single living system. This holistic awareness has profound applications far beyond navigation. Environmental scientists now look to wayfinding as a framework for understanding ecological change. A navigator's skill in detecting minute alterations in swell or bird migration is precisely the kind of sustained, nuanced observation needed to monitor coral reef health, track shifts in ocean currents due to climate change, or understand the impact of pollution on marine life. The ancient practice teaches us how to read the vital signs of our planet, to see the early warnings written in the environment long before they become catastrophic headlines. In this way, wayfinding offers a robust model for sustainable living. At its core, it is a philosophy of limits and reciprocity. A traditional voyage was meticulously planned around the carrying capacity of the canoe and the cycles of nature, launching only when the winds and seasons were right. It demanded that you take only what you needed because your survival depended on the health of the system you were traversing. You could not deplete the ocean, for it was your guide and your home. This intrinsic understanding of living within ecological boundaries, of navigating by reading natural signs rather than overpowering them, is perhaps the most vital lesson for our modern world. The revival of wayfinding shows us that this ancient science is not a relic to be preserved under glass. It is a living, evolving practice, a cognitive toolkit that equips us to address the very contemporary challenge of reconnecting with our environment. It asks a fundamental question: if our ancestors could cross an ocean by listening to the world, what might we hear if we too learned to be still and pay attention? The Mediterranean Sea, home to the legendary Phoenicians, offers a stark contrast in scale and challenge. Their world was a nearly enclosed basin, its shores rarely out of sight for more than a few days. Phoenician navigation was a masterpiece of coastal pilotage, a meticulous catalogue of landmarks, safe harbors, and prevailing currents. They sailed from headland to headland, their voyages a continuous dialogue with a visible coastline. This method was supremely effective for trade and colonization within a semi-enclosed sea, but it was a science of the near horizon. Venture beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the open Atlantic, and their system would have faltered, lacking the tools to navigate a true oceanic void. In the cold, mist-shrouded North Atlantic, the Vikings developed a different toolkit. They used a crude latitude sailing technique, tracking the sun's height with simple wooden boards. Legends and some archaeological finds suggest they may have used sunstones, crystals of calcite that can polarize light, to locate the sun's position on completely overcast days. They also watched for whales and specific seabirds like the fulmar, whose presence hinted at distant land. Yet even their epic voyages to Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland often involved island hopping or sailing within reach of known latitudes, rarely committing to weeks of total isolation from all terrestrial reference points. Meanwhile, in the Indian Ocean, Arab and Swahili traders mastered a different kind of rhythm, the monsoon. Theirs was a navigation of magnificent patience and calendar wisdom. They knew the winds reversed with metronomic seasonal reliability. A ship could depart East Africa on the northeast monsoon, ride it directly to India, wait for the season to change, and then catch the southwest monsoon back home. It was a wind-driven pendulum, a system that used the atmosphere itself as a vast, predictable engine. Charts and instruments like the camel, a simple rectangle of wood and string to measure stellar altitude, helped them judge latitude along familiar routes. But again, these were voyages across a narrower ocean basin, often within sight of land or along well-established corridors between known ports. Each of these traditions was a brilliant adaptation to its specific environment. But the Pacific Challenge was categorically different. It presented the ultimate blank slate, an abyss with no guiding coasts, no predictable seasonal wind reversals along a single axis, and no chain of intermediate islands for reassurance. The Pacific Navigator could not wait for a monsoon, for there was no monsoon. They could not sail from headland to headland, for there were none. Their environment forced the invention of a self-contained system, a science that had to find direction, position, and destination within the ever-shifting textures of the open sea itself. This required not just skill, but a complete cognitive remapping of the world. Where others navigated across a known space, Pacific Islanders learned to navigate within an unknown one, creating mental models so robust they could sustain a course and a community's hope for a month with no external validation. This unique intellectual achievement, born from the planet's most expansive geography, represents one of humanity's purest expressions of environmental integration and mental fortitude. It forces us to ask, if their mental maps were this precise for known islands, how far might their curiosity and their canoes have actually traveled? The sweet potato is a quiet revolutionary in the story of global exploration. This humble tuber, known as cumara in much of Polynesia, is native to the Andes Mountains of South America. Yet when European ships first reached the Pacific Islands, they found this South American crop thriving in Polynesian gardens from Hawaii to New Zealand. Radiocarbon dating of archaeological remains confirms it was present centuries before Christopher Columbus was even born. The plant could not have floated across the ocean by itself. Its arrival is a biological signature, a silent witness to a human journey that crossed the entire Pacific. For a people who carried their entire world in their canoes, transporting live cuttings of a valuable, nutritious crop would have been a natural act. The presence of the Kumara strongly suggests that at some point Polynesian voyagers reached the Americas, interacted with people there, and brought something precious back home with them. This single piece of evidence turns the map of pre-Columbian history on its head, suggesting the vast ocean was not an impenetrable barrier, but a potential highway for exchange. But is there more to the story than a shared vegetable? Other clues whisper of deeper connections. In central Chile, archaeologists uncovered chicken bones at a site called El Arenal, dated to around 600 years ago. Genetic analysis suggested these chickens were not of European descent, but showed a surprising link to Polynesian fowl. Chickens, like the sweet potato, are not native to the Americas. Their presence, if the findings hold, points directly to a trans-Pacific introduction. Linguists have also listened for echoes across the water, noting curious parallels. For instance, the Quechua word for sweet potato, kumar, bears a striking resemblance to the Polynesian kumara. While such similarities could be coincidence, they add another thread to a growing tapestry of possibility. The question then becomes not just if but how. Navigationally, such a voyage was well within Polynesian capability. One potential route mirrors the famous Kon-Tiki expedition, a westward drift from South America on the prevailing currents and winds. But that passive drift theory contradicts everything we know about active Polynesian wayfinding. A more compelling scenario involves an intentional eastward voyage from a place like Rapa Nui, Easter Island. From that already remote outpost, a navigator catching the right seasonal wind shift could make a long but feasible sail toward the coast of South America. The return voyage, sailing against the prevailing winds, would have been the true test of mastery, requiring expert windward sailing and supreme confidence. That very difficulty might explain why such contact, if it occurred, may not have been sustained or frequent. It would have been the outer edge of their exploratory range, a legendary voyage spoken of for generations. While the academic debate continues, and none of this evidence is considered 100% conclusive by all scholars, the collective weight is profound. It invites us to reimagine the ancient world not as a collection of isolated continents, but as a planet where determined cultures could, and likely did, brush against each other across the greatest of divides. It suggests that the Polynesian voyaging sphere may have been even more expansive than we dared to believe, its furthest tendrils possibly touching the shores of another world entirely. This possibility does not diminish the achievements of other cultures, but rather weaves a more interconnected human story, one written not in stone monuments, but in the spread of seeds, the bones of domesticated animals, and the enduring words for a shared, sustaining food. It challenges the traditional narrative of discovery, placing a double-hulled canoe from the heart of the Pacific alongside the caravels of Europe as a potential vessel of global connection. And if their horizons stretched so far, what does that tell us about the very nature of their motivation? What drove them to keep sailing into the blue unknown, generation after generation? The ocean's deep pulse holds a hidden geometry, one that modern science is only now learning to decode with satellites and supercomputers. For decades, the navigators claimed to feel an island's presence through the water alone stood as a powerful anecdote, a testament to human intuition. Today, advanced oceanographic models are revealing that this intuition was actually a precise reading of physics. Researchers can now simulate how the massive, submerged slopes of a volcanic island interact with the deep ocean swells that travel thousands of miles across the Pacific. These swells, generated by distant storms, carry immense energy. When they encounter the island's underwater bulk, that energy doesn't just vanish, it transforms. The swells bend or refract around the flanks of the seamount. They also reflect off the steep slopes, sending a fraction of their energy back out to sea. The interaction creates a complex interference pattern. a specific signature of peaks and troughs that radiates outward like a ripple from a stone thrown into a pond. To a satellite equipped with a radar altimeter, this pattern appears as a subtle, persistent distortion on the ocean surface, a wave shadow that can stretch for 50 miles or more beyond the island itself. This is the island's hydrodynamic fingerprint, and it is as unique as the landform that created it. What the ancient navigator felt in the gentle, persistent cross-swell against the hull was the literal pressure of this fingerprint, the ocean whispering the shape of something solid ahead. The science confirms that the information was always there, encoded in the rhythm of the water. It was a matter of developing the sensitivity to listen. This convergence is profoundly significant. It moves the navigator's art from the realm of mysterious skill into the domain of observable, replicable natural science. The PWO was not using magic. He was an expert applied physicist, interpreting subtle hydrodynamic signals long before we had the instruments to measure them. This validation opens fascinating new possibilities. If we can algorithmically model these wave fingerprints from space, could we use that data to enhance modern systems? Imagine search and rescue operations in vast ocean areas, where satellite data could identify likely wave distortions, narrowing the search grid for a missing vessel by suggesting the direction of the nearest unseen land. Or consider autonomous drones designed for ocean exploration, programmed not just with GPS, but with sensors to read swell patterns, allowing them to navigate or orient themselves using the ocean's own signatures as a backup or supplement to satellite signals. This is the promise of blending the oldest and newest forms of wayfinding, where ancestral knowledge of natural patterns informs the next generation of technology. It suggests that the most resilient navigation system might not rely solely on fragile satellites orbiting in space, but also on relearning how to read the enduring language of the sea itself. The principles of wayfinding offer more than a map for the ocean. They chart a course for the mind. This ancient discipline cultivates a specific state of being, a mindset built on profound attention. A navigator cannot afford distraction. They must continuously synthesize a dozen whispering data streams, the angle of a swell, the flight of a bird, the position of a fading star, into a single, coherent story of where they are. This requires a patience that modern life rarely demands, the ability to hold a course for weeks toward a destination that remains utterly invisible, trusting entirely in the wisdom passed down and the signs being read correctly in the moment. It is an exercise in faith in process over immediate reward, in the deep reference points over the fleeting landmark. This psychological framework is not locked in the past. It translates directly into how we navigate our own complex lives. Think of a personal or professional goal that lies far beyond your current horizon, perhaps a career shift, mastering a skill, or healing a relationship. The modern impulse is to seek constant validation, a blinking dot on a screen confirming we are on track. We grow anxious when we cannot see immediate progress. The Wayfinder's mindset offers a different model. It teaches us to establish our own deep reference points, our core values and long-term vision, and to steer by them even when daily frustrations or failures cloud the view. It is about maintaining direction without constant visual confirmation, understanding that the path to a meaningful destination is rarely a straight line visible from the start. In leadership and problem solving, this translates to holistic awareness. A good leader, like a good navigator, does not fixate on a single metric or loud voice. They synthesize multiple perspectives, read the subtle cultural currents within a team, and sense the cross-swells of coming challenges long before they break on the deck. They adapt to shifting conditions without losing sight of the ultimate bearing. This disciplined, integrated awareness stands in stark contrast to an age of fractured attention and short-term optimization. Our tools often promise efficiency but deliver fragmentation. pulling our focus into 1,000 immediate demands and away from the deeper patterns. The Wayfinder's legacy asks us to periodically look up from our screens to reconnect with the broader rhythms that guide us. It suggests that the most reliable compass for navigating any uncertainty, whether on the open ocean or in the choices of a life, may not be a device that gives an easy answer, but a cultivated ability to listen, to synthesize, and to hold steady on a course charted by deeper wisdom. This timeless mindset now faces its greatest test, not on the waves of the Pacific, but in the digital currents shaping our collective future. Any great story of the past invites questions, and the epic of Pacific navigation is no exception. For decades, a persistent counter-narrative suggested these voyages were not feats of skill, but accidents of nature. This is the accidental drift hypothesis, the idea that fishermen or families were simply blown off course by storms, drifting helplessly for weeks until they stumbled upon new land by sheer, desperate luck. On the surface, it seems a simpler explanation. The Pacific currents and trade winds do create natural corridors, but when we examine the evidence, this theory begins to unravel at the seams. First, consider the vessels. These were not fragile rafts or dugout canoes meant for calm lagoons. They were engineered, double-hulled voyaging canoes, built with immense effort and designed specifically for stability and windward sailing. You do not build a cathedral to take shelter from a passing rainstorm. The very existence of these sophisticated craft points to a culture prepared for and committed to long, intentional journeys. Next, look at the pattern of settlement. Archaeology shows a rapid, eastward expansion across the Pacific at a pace that mirrors a deliberate exploration, not a series of random disasters. The spread of the distinct Lapita pottery style is like a trail of breadcrumbs, moving from island to island in a sequential wave over just a few generations. Genetic studies tell the same story, showing clear lineages and the intentional transport of plants and animals. A one-way drift might explain a single, isolated settlement, but it cannot account for the systematic colonization of an ocean, where each new founding population carried the full toolkit needed to establish a society, from breadfruit seedlings to breeding pairs of animals. Finally, and most decisively, we have the reproducible proof of modern voyages. The Hōkūleʻa did not drift to Tahiti. It was guided there against prevailing winds and currents for much of the journey, using the recovered ancient techniques. This was a controlled experiment that demonstrated intentional wayfinding is not only possible, but remarkably precise. To claim the ancestors merely drifted is to ignore the living testimony of the canoe itself and the master navigators who today still read the ocean's language. More nuanced debates exist among scholars who fully accept the skill of the navigators. One involves the scale and frequency of contact after initial settlement. Once isolated communities were established on far-flung islands, did they maintain regular two-way voyaging networks, or did they become largely self-sufficient and isolated? Evidence suggests a spectrum. In the Central Pacific, archipelagos like Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji likely maintained a vibrant exchange for centuries. For the most remote outliers like Rapa Nui or Hawaii, sustained long-distance contact would have been exponentially harder, perhaps fading over time as local identities solidified, and the immense risks of the return voyage outweighed the benefits. This isn't a failure of navigation, but a natural evolution of societies adapting to their new, and sometimes extremely distant, homes. Another thoughtful discussion centers on environmental context. Some researchers point to climatic periods like the medieval warm period, a time of slightly altered wind and precipitation patterns across the globe, and ask if such windows might have facilitated certain voyages. Could a temporary shift in trade winds have made a specific eastward leg to Rapa Nui slightly easier? It is a compelling question that adds depth to our understanding. It does not diminish the navigator's skill, but rather frames it within the dynamic theater of Earth's climate. Even with a favorable wind, finding a pinpoint island after a month at sea remains a monumental task of cognition and courage. Engaging with these critiques does not weaken the story, it strengthens it. It shows that the case for sophisticated, intentional Pacific navigation is not based on romantic legend, but on a robust, multidisciplinary convergence of evidence, from linguistics and archaeology to genetics and experimental voyaging. It is a case that is continually refined, becoming more detailed and more human with every new discovery and every thoughtful question asked. This rigorous foundation now allows us to pose an even grander question, one that looks beyond the mechanics of the journey to its ultimate source of power. What was the cultural engine, the deep-seated belief system, that could motivate an entire community to send its best and brightest into the blue unknown, generation after generation? The canoe's journey was a story written by an entire community. While the master navigator at the helm commands our attention, the voyage's success relied on a deep and often overlooked partnership, one that wove together the strengths of men and women into a single, resilient chord. To envision these epic crossings as a solitary male endeavor is to miss the true social architecture that made them possible. Women were not passive passengers waiting on a distant shore. They were active co-authors of the voyaging saga, their contributions embedded in every stage from conception to landfall. In some traditions, women themselves held the sacred knowledge of the stars. In parts of Micronesia, particularly on atolls like Piailug, there are documented accounts of women who were recognized as master navigators, holding the star compass and commanding voyages. Their inclusion was not an exception, but a reflection of a system that valued capability and inherited knowledge above all else. More commonly, women served as essential ritual specialists. Before a canoe's launch, their role was often to prepare both the vessel and the crew spiritually and physically. They might oversee ceremonies to bless the canoe, ensuring its harmony with the ocean's forces. They prepared special foods and medicines, safeguarding the health and spiritual purity of the voyagers. This ritual work was not peripheral. It was a critical layer of protection, a way of aligning human intention with the immense and unpredictable power of the sea. The physical fabric of the voyage literally passed through their hands. The vast sails that harnessed the wind were not bought, they were made, painstakingly woven from thousands of pandanus leaves. This was a monumental feat of textile engineering, requiring an intimate knowledge of materials, patterns, and tension to create a surface that could withstand weeks of gales and salt spray. The miles of strong, flexible cordage used to lash the hulls together were rolled from coconut fiber, a process demanding immense skill and patience. Every stitch and knot represented a collective investment, a tangible expression of the community's trust and hope placed in the voyage. Upon landfall, their roles shifted decisively to that of founders. While navigators found the island, women built the home. They were the first gardeners, transplanting the precious shoots of taro, breadfruit, and coconut they had carried so carefully. They established the rhythms of the new settlement, turning an unfamiliar coast into a place of sustenance and culture. Their knowledge of plants for food, medicine, and tools was the bedrock upon which survival depended. Their mastery of genealogy and oral history provided the narrative thread that connected this new beginning to the ancestral homeland across the sea. This holistic view transforms our understanding. The voyaging canoe was not a warship with a crew of adventurers. It was a vessel of migration, often carrying whole families. The presence of women and children on board was the ultimate declaration of intent. This was not an exploratory raid, it was a permanent transfer of life. Their complementary skills created a complete societal microcosm afloat. The navigator's celestial science was matched by the settler's terrestrial wisdom. One could not exist without the other. Recognizing this partnership corrects the historical record, moving us from a tale of lone heroes to a story of communal resilience. It presents voyaging as it truly was, a family-centric endeavor where every member, through their unique knowledge and labor, carried a vital piece of the future. This social fabric, woven with threads of mutual dependence and shared purpose, was the true secret to sustainability, allowing not just for a single heroic crossing, but for the creation of a lasting world across the waves. The revival of wayfinding faced a modern dilemma, one of purity versus purpose. Should a voyaging canoe built with fiberglass and epoxy resin still be considered a vessel of tradition? Is consulting a GPS unit during a storm a betrayal of the ancestors' methods? These are not just technical questions, they are profound ethical crossroads for communities reclaiming their heritage. The answer that emerged from the decks of canoes like Hōkūleʻa was neither rigid traditionalism nor wholesale modernization, but a third path built on a clear hierarchy of values. The paramount, non-negotiable goal is the preservation and active practice of the core cognitive knowledge, the star compass, the wave piloting, the deep ecological literacy. The tools themselves, whether an adze or a laminate, are secondary to the living mind that guides them. This philosophy draws a vital distinction between the sacred knowledge and the practical vessel that carries it. A master navigator's understanding of the swell patterns is the irreplaceable treasure, the living library. The hull that floats him is a means of access. If using a modern, durable material allows more canoes to be built, more voyages to be undertaken, and more students to learn on the water, then it serves the higher purpose of keeping the knowledge alive. The same principle applies to the most contentious modern tool, the global positioning system. In contemporary voyaging, GPS is treated not as a primary guide, but as a silent safety net. It is the nautical equivalent of a sealed black box on an aircraft, a device to be opened only in the event of a true emergency, when life is at risk or when all traditional methods have been exhausted by unforeseen conditions. On a typical training sail or long-distance voyage, the unit remains powered off and stowed away. The navigator and crew operate solely by the ancient signs, building confidence and reinforcing the mental discipline required. This practice creates a powerful psychological container. Knowing the safety net exists allows a new generation to take the courageous, necessary risks of learning, to venture beyond the sight of land with the security to make and recover from mistakes. Without this pragmatic allowance, the revival might have remained a theoretical exercise, too perilous to attempt with novice crews. This balanced approach honors the spirit of the tradition far more than a brittle, literalist reenactment ever could. The ancestors used the very best materials and techniques available to them, from stone adzes to woven pandana sails. Their genius was in adaptation, in using the resources at hand to solve the monumental problem of crossing an ocean. To insist on using only ancient materials in a world of advanced composites would, in a way, dishonor their innovative spirit. It would freeze the practice in a museum diorama, making it a fragile artifact rather than a living, breathing, evolving part of contemporary culture. The true measure of success is not whether a canoe is built exactly as it was 500 years ago, but whether a young person today can still look at the night sky, name the star paths, feel the ocean's rhythm, and find their way home. The modern revival demonstrates that cultural practices are not static. They are rivers, not statues. They can integrate new tributaries, new tools and understandings without losing their essential current, their core identity and wisdom. This pragmatic wisdom, born on the open ocean, now offers a guiding principle for any community seeking to reclaim its past while navigating the complexities of the present. It shows that the most resilient traditions are those that know what to hold sacred and what to adapt for the journey ahead. The ocean they once navigated with such reverence now carries a new and troubling signature. Across the Pacific, modern voyaging canoes like Hōkūleʻa and her sister vessel Hikionalia sail on a mission that extends far beyond cultural revival. Their voyages are now dedicated to a principle called Malama Hanua, a Hawaiian phrase meaning to care for our island Earth. This is not a metaphor, as these traditionally built canoes cross the same seas their ancestors mastered. Their crews witness firsthand the profound changes sweeping the planet. They see the plastic debris fouling remote atolls where no one lives. They document shifts in fish populations and coral bleaching events, and they feel the altered rhythms of winds and currents that speak of a climate in flux. The canoe itself becomes the most powerful messenger, sailing without fossil fuels, guided by wind and stars. It is a living demonstration of a sustainable relationship with nature. Each landfall is not just an arrival, but a conversation. Crews meet with scientists, community leaders, and schoolchildren, sharing not only the story of their voyage, but the urgent evidence gathered from the ocean itself. They bridge indigenous knowledge, which views the environment as a familial network to be nurtured, with modern data, creating a holistic picture of planetary health. This transforms the ancient art from a historical curiosity into a vital framework for contemporary survival. The navigator's core skill was reading subtle environmental signs to avoid disaster and find sanctuary. Today, the entire human community faces a similar task. The rising acidity of the oceans, the loss of biodiversity, the intensification of storms, these are the cross-swells and cloud brands of our time, the signals that our course is leading toward peril. The Voyager's message is that we must collectively relearn how to read these signs. Their advocacy highlights a profound connection. The same intimate awareness that allowed humans to populate the Pacific is precisely the awareness needed to protect it. They argue that we cannot GPS our way out of this crisis with technology alone. We must cultivate a deeper wayfinding mindset for the planet. This means seeing the Earth not as a collection of resources to be extracted, but as a single, interconnected island in the vastness of space, a fragile vessel whose systems we must learn to read and respect. The voyage of Malama Hanua makes the historical mystery urgently personal. It asks every one of us what signs we are ignoring in our own lives and communities, and what course correction we might need to steer toward a more sustainable horizon. The same ocean that taught the ancient navigators now holds a new, deeper mystery. Beneath the waves, in the crushing darkness of the abyss, engineers are designing robots that think like wayfinders. These autonomous underwater vehicles cannot rely on GPS, as satellite signals vanish just below the surface, to map the seafloor or monitor ecosystems for months without human guidance. They need a self-contained sense of place. Their solution is a form of artificial intuition, directly inspired by the Pacific Masters. Programmers feed these machines algorithms that teach them to read the subtle signatures of deep ocean currents, to sense the pressure changes from distant tides, and to build a continuous, internal model of their position based on the moving landscape of water itself. It is digital wave piloting, a silicon version of the Navigator feeling the swell through the hull. This biomimicry acknowledges that for navigating complex, sensor-deprived environments, the oldest human methods might be the most sophisticated blueprint we have. That blueprint is now being studied for a realm even more vast and empty than the Pacific, the space between stars. At NASA and other research centers, mission planners for future interstellar travel face a problem that would feel hauntingly familiar to a Polynesian navigator. On a voyage lasting generations to another star, a spacecraft will travel so far from Earth that traditional communication will be impossible, and our familiar celestial landmarks will distort beyond recognition. A crew born on the ship will have no blinking dot on a screen to tell them where they are. They will need to navigate by the stars themselves, by observing the subtle shifts in the light of distant suns, and by maintaining a perfect collective mental model of their trajectory across a sea of darkness. Researchers look to the oral traditions and cognitive frameworks of Pacific navigators as a profound analog. How did a society train individuals to hold a cosmic map in their mind for weeks at sea? How did they maintain morale and discipline when the destination was invisible? The answers are not just historical curiosities, they are potential survival manuals for the ultimate long-distance voyage. This connection brings our story full circle, from the wooden canoe to the starship. It reveals that the core challenge of exploration never changes, only the scale. Whether your vessel is lashed together from tree trunks or forged from titanium, the fundamental task is to remain oriented within an immense and indifferent universe using the clues it provides. The ancient Pacific Islanders mastered this on their own planetary ocean. Their legacy is a testament to a specific kind of human intelligence, one that prioritizes deep observation, environmental literacy, and resilient mental modeling over passive reliance on tools. As we stand on the brink of sending machines into the abyss, and perhaps one day ourselves into the interstellar deep, their wisdom offers a startlingly relevant compass. It suggests that to navigate the farthest frontiers, we may first need to recover a way of seeing that we allowed to fade, a way of listening to the world that tells us not just where we are, but who we are in relation to the great star-scattered expanse. Their story is a quiet revolution in how we see human history, intelligence, and possibility. We began with a vast, empty ocean and a question of impossibility. We end with a profound realization that the greatest journeys are not measured in miles, but in the depth of connection they forge. The ancient navigators of the Pacific did not conquer the sea, they learned its language. They crafted a science so elegant and complete it turned the sky into a compass, the waves into a map, and the flight of a bird into a guiding arrow. This was not primitive survival, it was a high art, a sacred dialogue between a people and their planet. Their canoes carried more than families and food, they carried an entire worldview, a philosophy of limits, reciprocity, and profound attention. That philosophy is their most vital legacy to us now. In an age of digital distraction and environmental disconnection, we are all navigating uncharted waters. The Wayfinder's mindset offers a different kind of bearing. It teaches us that the most reliable course is not plotted by ignoring the world around us in favor of a screen, but by learning to read its subtle, enduring signs. It argues that resilience comes not from having all the answers at our fingertips, but from cultivating the patience to hold a course toward a horizon we cannot yet see, guided by the stars of our deepest values and collective memory. The revival of this knowledge across the Pacific is a powerful beacon, proving that even a tradition pushed to the brink of extinction can be reawakened when a generation decides to listen again. It shows us that the past is not a sealed book, but a living compass waiting to be consulted. As you step away from this story, perhaps you will feel the world around you with a new sensitivity. You might notice the angle of the afternoon light, the direction of the wind, or the particular pattern of clouds. You might look up at the night sky and see not just stars, but ancient pathways, stories written in light across the dome of time. The greatest mystery these mariners solved was not how to cross an ocean, but how to remain profoundly, intelligently at home within it. That is the voyage that still awaits us all. If this journey has inspired you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more explorations into history's greatest mysteries, and perhaps look up at the night sky with new eyes.